Well, good day, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in this big, wide world that is going through some interesting times. Welcome to the World Poetry Cafe. And we've had some great poets this last few days. And but I'm Nick Toxic, all sorts of people, and it's been wonderful. And I thought, well, I feel like doing another set. I haven't got anything new, but I thought I'd go back to some times before we were locked up. I sort of think I'm going into the fourth week of isolation, but I don't feel like I'm isolated because I'm talking to so many people across this world. If we've taken advantage of this situation, it's brought us closer together. And I was reminded of another period of coming out of isolation. I'd been working, and I stress working, in a prison. And you're not allowed to take your mobile phones into prison, or cell phone if you're listening on the far side of the Atlantic. And so I came out and I checked my messages, and it was someone saying, I need a poet. I can pay you money. Well, that's kind of unusual in itself. So, I rang her up, and it was for the opening of an art exhibition the next day. So there was kind of a pressure because I had to do something immediately. And it was of a Chinese artist painting pictures of Suffolk. So this is what came out. It's called Elemental. I need a poet, she said, like you can just pluck stars from the sky and mix monsoons with cherry blossom. Drowning in rainwater and petals, I grasp a beam of light and swing towards the moon. Elemental, accidental clashes of the imagination with big skies and sunrise. No surprise in this place, where tidal water meets freshwater feeling at the edge of the hedge. East side, west side, it's a divide, defined by concrete rings and things manufactured. What we need is John Clare's stare, without the instability of incarceration, the ability to wing it through the changes. Wind and rain rearranges the border disorder. At high tide, the county is getting smaller by the year. Here, there is an illusion of permanence. Grounded by the plough, takeoff is harder than ever. Now airfields no longer mix propellers and plovers, lovers, and a lay for today keeps the homesickness at bay, some say, but the sky defies definition. The sea's on a mission, the ground doesn't even ask permission before it splits. This is it, elemental and blue as green as yellow as, purple haze on the highway, desert burns on the skin, bats in the belfry, the turmoil within. As a youth, I watched the ships dock and sail, morning and night, got seduced by the light's reflection on the far side of the river, while my side snakes through the country to Wormingford and beyond. Disturbed only by boy entrants and fishermen, I searched the shingle for clues, sat on a wall where the road ended and tidal waters flowed to the sea, and talked for hours to girls I wanted to explore the world with. Travelling north, I lay on a mountainside and bathed in the midnight sun. Travelling south, I freewheeled down the mini Atlas in an Austin A35 and wondered at the eagles circling below us. Travelling to the edge of sanity as I knew it, I was taunted by the red-hot earth centre as I walked on fresh-set lava flows. Now I travel with a new generation, and we look up at fault lines dividing the hill country from the flatlands in Texas caverns. Earth and water, air and fire. So many carbon combinations. Colour me liquid and paint me into the cracks of the planet. Colour me solid and fashion me into the stepping stone to tomorrow. Colour me gas and burn me in a lamp of my own making. I'm there for the taking, and always have been. The peninsula knew that way back when it kept me a river's width from my dreams. Oh. Oh, whoa. I think I'm going to move straight on. Next page. I haven't read this in ages. It's kind of... I don't know whether this is about now or later or... I wrote it in the hill country in Texas. And I was actually sitting out on my friend's porch. And I was listening to the sounds of the night. And kind of all that governmental stuff seems so just far away. An uncontrolled nature. Nature is an uncontrolled thing. So it's called nightlife. Listen to the sounds of the night and then tell me you're in control, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, misdemeanor between a war zone and a hard place where the race to the White House, to Downing Street, to the offbeat tangents of minimal credibility rests on the edge of a notional currency from the bank of abdication. It's a far move from the homelands and secure constituencies that fails to recognise your inability to hear, so relax. Clean out the wax. Test yourself out on the night, and then tell me you were right at any time. I'm going back to Suffolk. Love Suffolk. That's for those in other countries. That's a county on the east of England. A little bit that lumps that sticks out into the North Sea. It's called Suffolk Eastside. I've walked this coast from Bordsey to Lowestoft, past bird sanctuaries, power stations, bleached tree trunks, sand cliffs, forests, salt marshes and shingle shores that drown the feet. Watch friends cradle fishing boats into the river at Orford, who, being unable to earn a living with their nets, changed islands, teaching boat building in the hot sun of Jamaica before coming home to convert old vessels back to sail. I'd never seen anything like it. Out on the mud of Melton, they drilled holes without so much as a tape measure, hitting the beam on the deck above every time. What eyes! She told me they'd met on a canal strip with her parents. They thought they'd hired him for his skill on the water, not to run away with their daughter. Those were the days. I took my lunch at will, driving up and down the coast in a brown van, handbrake on the steering column, dropping off conduit to contractors and farms. Between Aldborough and Thorpeness, I sunk into the stones and had to get a tractor from the holiday park to pull me out. Now, Maggie's shells fish for an imaginary world inhabited by artists, sailors and good old boys and girls, still singing in secret pubs we only stumble on by accident. I've driven along this coast with its hostile sea and risen the waters, on ferries that took us to the mainland to tour, in transits and bicycles, bringing back artists from Eastern Europe who came to spread their wings in a land where drinking stops by the bell and the music has to be licensed. I have memories of this coast too painful to tell, of friends claimed by the sea and me, a landlubber, held tight in that place where thistles push their way up above the tide line. It's called Make Love, not War or Motorways. You can tell me it's about black and white till you're red in the face, and you can tell me about your race, but I can't stand the pace of misdirected hatred because I have a dread of misread history. And you can tell me it's about Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Jew, me and you, till you turn blue. But that does not make it true. There's not much left that hasn't been stolen. The stomach's getting swollen all over does not mean everyone we don't know is living in clover, and that is not to deny the cry of the dispossessed and oppressed, but if we wring our hands in despair, it doesn't matter how much we care. All we do is weep and leave others to drown in our sorrow. Hold hands and we can circle the hills of Palestine and the villages of Kurdistan till governments and companies not part of the scheme and the obsolete becomes obsolete. But for that we need a new beat, one that does not come from the city, the brokers, the jokers, the chokers with multinational greed and pollution. From them there will be no absolution, for they are abstract, outside time, and conceptually flawed, at odds with the simplicity of trees and a swords to ploughshare philosophy that suits me, where we are all free to make love, to make love, to make love to whoever we want, wherever we want, whoever wants us. Yeah, we're not free at the moment, but there have been times, and there will be again. There will be times again. This lockdown will end. Whoa. This is kind of, it's a tribute to a friend. I was at a friend's wake, and it was kind of a huge celebration of his life. He was a completely crazy cat. Called One Last Bohemia. You know, and I think at this time, when we are inevitably losing people, and I hope it hasn't happened to you, but I think sometimes we have to look back at people's lives and think of the good thing. This is a poem about a wake. She said, it broke her heart, how she'd gone back to Istanbul last year and all the hotels were owned by foreigners. She told us how when she first visited local vendors, met passengers at the station and vied with each other to persuade them to book into their friend's hostelry, how there were three prices, locals, visiting Turks and tourists from other lands. How if you made friends in the neighbourhood, you soon became one of the inner circle of road-worn Europeans who paid local prices, because they knew they were in another country and expected nothing to be like home. We swapped travellers' tales, till her companion, an old hand and long-time friend of us both, who traded this and that at boot sales and festivals, who moved west a year before because he could no longer afford to live off other people's cast-off in the east, talked of walking at night nearly 50 years earlier from Tunisia to Algeria, when he missed the bus, how the desert was so cold and it took half an hour before his hands were warm enough to sign his name at the customs post, and how the Algerian border guard lent him his leather gloves. I left them swapping memories at the corner of the bar they occupied since the funeral. Before another face from my own landscape since 1963 reminisced on art school dances and visiting lecturers who decades later had whole galleries dedicated to them at the Tate Modern. It was that kind of wake, where tale after tale was told and retold. Men I had never met before shared stories of selling encyclopedias to American servicemen in Germany, and how Dickie had always had a plan, and it had to be put into action immediately. Like the time he rang up and said they were to sign up to a degree course in history at some new London university because there would be parties, women and everlasting good times. Another reminded us of how Dickie had grown a beard and joined a Christian commune near Saxmundham, and time after time some young artist would come up and tell how they'd been given their first spot on stage by him, or how they'd arrived in town from some far-off country and how by magic he'd found them and made them part of everything he touched. We laughed about his inability to stand still and how he'd introduce us to total strangers and immediately be elsewhere. Out in the garden, sharing cigarettes and memories. Mothers and lovers talked about times he'd become impossible and so exasperating they'd had to leave. And the music played, and the poets read, and we watched slide after slide, and all took in as he strode off into the black and white distance, his last subtitle of the film, "Everybody has to die sometime." Well, I'm just going to see. It's a very Suffolk set. I might stay in Suffolk or I might go elsewhere. Just got to see the time. Oh, we've got a bit of time. Got about a quarter of an hour. I'm going to stay with Suffolk. It doesn't hurt, you know. Poets are always doing this. They write about their own areas because we know them. And this was kind of an autobiographical piece. And it's called My Ipswich. And it travels, I suppose, from about the 60s through to the 90s. We'll see how far we get on this set. From the gondolier to the bamboo, I knew those jukeboxes backwards, knew where I could find the blues, big bill bruises, if you're white, you're right, hanging in the middle of the rickshaw, all black leather jackets and frothy coffee, and me in my high-collared flowered shirt. I can still hear them speculating as to whether I wore makeup or not. And in my own land, where passing beatniks lay their sleeping rolls, and the proprietor told us art students when our 1 cup of espresso was due, Tommy Tucker rocked on them high-heeled sneakers, and Howling Wolf gave me a philosophy to die for in going down slow. I've done things that kings and queens ain't ever done, and I've been places kings and queens ain't ever been. Decades later, and without relevance, I found it was Willie Dixon who spoke those words. But music machines aren't much on history, and I would still have packed my bag, got my thumb out, hitched north, where I did sleep in the goods trucks of Oslo railway sidings, where I shared breakfast with whores and hustlers, as well as sleeping in the caboose of the King's own railway carriage. I even put my tent up in the palace garden before being evicted by the Royal Guards, and I would still have drunk early morning tea at Quick Snacks on Norwich Road, open all hours to ladies of the night and temporarily dysfunctional youth, and drunk Ted cider at the Black Horse and caught the last gasp of the King's Head in the wall. I would have still run sailors and good time girls from the Blue Coat to their ship at 2 bob a head, when all I'd intended was to post a late letter at the thought sorting office, and I would have still have drunk white rum from orange juice bottles and got kicked out of the Coach and Horses with long tall Guyanese waving down Austin Nash Metropolitans at midnight to run us the last half mile to my first Ipswich flat in Gibbswick Road. At 16, I tasted Newcastle Brown in the bar of the Manor Ballroom. I could afford my entrance and 1 drink, and the blues came live and loud. John Lee Hooker, Champion Jack Dupre, and our own Geno Washington, and before that the jazz, with Chris Barber exposing my virgin self to the sounds of some really excellent women telling me exactly what was on my mind. And in the colder winter we moved to the Baths Hall, where Rod the Mod Stewart introduced us the idea of men in eyeshadow and makeup, and Sonny Boy Williamson drank the biggest bottle of whiskey I'd ever seen in the space of 1 set. Ron and Natalie Leslie came up each week from their London club in their E-Type Jag for Bluesville and never used doorman. No doorman either at Halloween at the High Street, where groundhogs in outrageous checks blew away an art school, where ideas flowed as fast as Dick's plastic sax, and Maggie played Spanish guitar in the cloakroom. All you want to do is ride, Sally, ride. Saturday night is and always was party night, sniffing out rumours at the Swan, gathering in the vaults for lifts 14 to a Ford. We layered by gender, one on another, there and back, always ending with Giles playing boogie woogie on pianos he dismantled for the purpose. We writers, survivors of the Spanish Civil War and Civic College, discussed the implications of San Francisco Oracle Issue 1, read about our rights in pamphlets printed by the Council for Civil Liberties, complained to chief superintendents in their headquarters at Cornhill about being stopped by plainclothes policemen coming out of our own homes, and collected fares from Cranes to Bedderback. Better-bake. Each night at Constantine Road Garage we counted our tickets and their money. They never did put the overs against the shortfall, and I soon learned to collect my fourpences at the station without banging out a ticket. But I never did learn about fare stages, only that at knocking off time at Churchman's the whole world seemed to be pushing on its way onto a single decker to Chantry, and someone had to tell the day shift we were full, and no amount of moving up the bus was going to make room for everyone. But we were kings, graciously helping mother with trippers and travelling for free with our girlfriends and grannies. I was on nodding towns with the town's abortionists and could stop a bus anywhere I wanted. Married! And into a new decade, I commuted my way to an Austin A50 van, £36 tax and MOT. I was given in exchange for helping to stock an art shop round the corner from Winfield Street Maternity Home, where they sent me home to get drunk as my firstborn arrived with 4 set marks on her forehead. I passed around the stores at Anglesey Road. She was admired by sisters and ward orderlies, kissed by parcel men from the railway and road services who collected returns in our ladders for moonlighting in a 3-wheeled yellow Arctics and green parcel vans. And Ron, the storeman, who made her cry because he was clean shaven. By then we kept everything from bedpans to scalpels in the old laundry by the mortuary, and it was all undercover. But the Trinidadian nurses in their Foneray Road residence didn't lean out of their windows anymore on Saturday morning to feed me the hottest pickle I'd ever tasted, and the men didn't mend their motorbikes with tools borrowed from our wooden palace down the drive from the Path Lab and engineering. I was union chairman, had ideas about democracy, voted against bonus schemes, and thought fairness and honesty were a basis for negotiation. I met cosy members in the morning on the bread round and transport and general in maintenance. I was disciplined on Felix by a sister who served her patients and no others. Given my morning tea on Moseley. On Burton, I hid whiskey in a private patient's wardrobe and tried to have them all back on the NHS during the strike. In X-Ray, Jan told me stories of his wartime youth as a forced worker for the Nazis and how he got a British officer he served after the armistice to arrange his passage to Harwich instead of Poland. We delivered wood from the hospital to his allotment off Hay Hill Road and drank homemade wine at Christmas. We collected our pay every Friday in cash. And Bob, the groundsman, taught us not to take any nonsense from computers. A true-born Norfolk man, he rode Speedway for King's Lynn in the 20s, drove food lorries into London during the general strike, and wasn't about to have any machine telling what his wages should be. Eating fresh fish from the Felixstowe ferry, old friends sat in my front room telling me university was a possibility with a degree of maturity and a couple of A-levels gained in 1 year's evening classes at the college. So I struggled through the unification of Italy between connecting GPs with wards, calling housemen back from the Greyhound, and advising Nigerian doctors how to contact their wives in Hungary, as I worked relief on the switchboard and had my Christmas dinner on the job at midnight. It wasn't easy to stay unemployed in those days, but I claimed my benefit for a few weeks before the examinations and found myself delivering conduit and cable and washing machines around Suffolk the day after. Every Saturday morning we ran our vans to Sewell's for servicing and watched the initial girls and their laundry trucks hurtle from their Riverside Road depots to customers who closed at midnight. I rebuilt £2 Morris Minors in the first time in a Witten garden, ate my breakfast at Jack's Cafe with the other drivers, and could find my way as fast as any veteran. On a grant for a married man and 1 child, Newey and Eyre only saw me in the holiday trips, but I shrieked with joy when the postman brought the results of my A-levels and I learned to be a student again at the University of East Anglia. My wife rigged lights at the Arts Centre in Tower Street, knelt before the console turning wheels at every queue, went to go round with John Southworth playing Beckett, and helped to make costumes for Romeo in a theatre basement. Play Away came every year to touch a live audience, and my daughter learned clean-shaven men were fine as long as they were wearing makeup and dressed in velvet. I planned free Monday night shows with actors who lodged in our spare rooms, and a refugee American from Mississippi recovering from Vietnam. The audience thought it was something to do with Black Power, and didn't realise the show was over when we introduced Ipswich to the theatre of the absurd in the middle of an Alan Ayckbourn stage set. Tower Street close to Breck, and although the cast would never again have to exit left and enter right by running in the snow through the back alleys of the theatre, we knew an age had passed. I still have the happy end beer mat, together with memories of after-show meals in a Malaysian restaurant in the middle of Greyfriars roundabout. Graduation. With the woman behind the desk at Great Coleman Street telling me I was not eligible for benefit and the realisation full employment was a distant memory, so I scoured the staff for jobs, found myself sweeping the East Anglian between shifts, caught the last working press, scraped paste-ups offcuts off from the floor, bought a Bedford CA, weighed newspaper into Lavenham Road for recycling, put polished canteens and toilets at Manganese Bronze, got complaints from the gate man for working in shorts and no top in the summer of '76, and found myself banned from ransoms for trying to organise the cleaners into a union. When I went for a promotion to driver, the contract cleaners in St. Peter Street lectured me about the evils of communism as a prelude to my dismissal. But I discovered scrap metal, and the joys of treasure hunting for copper, brass and alley in the yards and driftways of businesses that nestled between turn-of-the-century terraces from Bramford Road to Vauxhall. We took our chat to Pooley's, whose weighbridge flooded with the Gipping, our cast to Sackers on the other side of the river, and our light iron to the cardboard to Southgate Brothers on Grove Lane, who still took rag in a blue shed full of memorabilia collected by their father in his first yard in Long Street. I changed my CA for a Ford Thames. With 3 gears and a column change, found a partner with a flat-back tranny and a wealth of knowledge, and went every Tuesdays to Webster's auction yard on Portman Road, where we bought second-hand furniture, rusty tools, trays of eggs, live chickens, where we had 2 minutes silent when old man Singh died and Mr. Webster spoke with reverence that was of his funeral that was to take place in India. All the while, the town was Bobby's as the boys brought home the cup and we packed Cornhill to cheer our hero's return. Ipswich Poetry Workshop prepared for publications and performance in barely rented rooms on the Drama Centre in Gatacre Road, where later Rose would train a succession of young men in stage lighting, and I would sit through stage one's rehearsal with our newborn son on our lap. But not before I'd fallen into punk and reggae, with our first Rock Against Racism gig with the Ruts and Black Ivory at Manor Ballroom, where we waited for the bomb squad to declare the music safe. In a twin-wheel tranny with a 3-litre Zephyr Zodiac V6 engine under the bonnet and the smell of rotting fish meal in the back, I carried the message of poetry from Edinburgh to the Gardener's Arms, drove jip and switch from American bass to American bass, took the Orwell string band from Oxborough's, where old Irishmen in wide-bottomed trousers step danced on a Friday night with the agility of youth, to see the Chieftains in Manchester and Elvis Costello in Brockwell Park, and Black Ivory asked me to manage them because I'd booked them 3 times and I owned a van. My wife taught supply at Tower Ramparts, where 5th years came to school to register before crossing over to work on a market in Crown Street, as the leaving age went up to 16, keeping bargee boys on land for a year longer than they wanted and making plumbers' mates a thing of the past. When the school moved to Stoke, they asked me to take motor mechanics. When the 5th years, excluded from exams, drove out their teacher by his first lunch break, and they pushed vehicles over my feet, slammed my fingers in car doors and electrocuted me by switching on the power as I worked on the wires of a cutaway engine. In class, people who now invite me to their homes to look at their writing flick peanuts at me. I ran the choir home after school concerts in the back of a transit, read Caribbean poetry to the girls in typing, and listened to stories of what children had endured in public lavatories from respectable white women. You're not going there after that. It took 3 years, and the burning of Brixton, St Paul's and Most Side before we stopped washing our hands of the obvious. But we rocked the back of Murrayside with 2 stages and a police superintendent with a communication problem. Warriors made their debut as Black Pepper, and Paul Packwood taught us what youth work was all about. Jimmy Partridge painted retarded on the back of his jacket and played guitar at the speed of light. You only did that stuff once. when a single neighbour with an objection got the backing of the whole constabulary, but it had launched an era. Jar Warriors, with their 12-year-old bassman, played for the mayor at the town hall, won the Black Echoes Music Award in London, and introduced reggae to the Moon Fair at Burgolt before the convoy, failing to notice East Anglia was not Stonehenge, helped consign Albion to the land of legend. This was a time of promise, when an Acton youth club owned a 32-seater coach and filled it every weekend with band followers, travelling with the Addicts from Northampton to Hastings. A new theatre opened opposite the Civic Centre, where I took my daughter to see Shakespeare before clearing the path from my front door to the bedroom so the midwife could visit Rose, confined to her bed for months as she waited for the birth of our first son. At the Heathrow maternity unit, the ward sister asked me if I considered the possibility of twins before finding it was an undiagnosed breach. They sent me home to wait while my wife endured an emergency cesarean at midnight. When the hospital rang, they told me all was not as well as it might have been, and I was relieved to find all that was wrong was a cleft lip and palate, requiring 5-hour feeds and 23 years of surgery between operations and speech therapy. My boy spent his infancy surrounded by poets and musicians, told James Berry he had heard he was a wise man and asked him about God, sat in a dressing room with Will Gaines, listened to stories of Harlems and learned to tap dance from the sitting position. He took up football with the Kesgrave Flyers and travelled in bands with Rastafarians who believed if they relinquished Bolton Lane, where they swept up after their sound systems every Friday night, when Paul Eck collected 50 pences at the door and helped paint the vacant police garage on Woodbridge Road, they would have a home. Years later, bitter with disappointment, they were to occupy the race relations office next door when blues dances led to roadblocks and arrests, and the licensing authority granted the Caribbean leave to play music till the early hours of Saturday morning. Decades later, and before the council closed the building, visiting black actors from Manchester and the New Wolsey Theatre talked about the surviving nights of reggae as a cultural experience. And the children of the occupation played football for England. At Priory Heath, a trombone-playing music teacher sent the young men who stole his microphone between suspensions to compete against public school sixth formers at the TSB music competition, while I pleaded with the manager for Dukes to let older brothers keep their residency, taking their inspiration straight from the bass at Bentwaters. They played for Jeff at the King's Head in Bungay and upstairs at Ronnie Scott's in Soho. We'd never had a venue of our own in Ipswich, but the Arts Centre in Colchester gave me a home for 4 years, while here, refugees from the cellar of the Albion Mills, dug out by Dell to accommodate jazzmen, poets and punks, met every week at the county to campaign for live music. With a taste for glory, we put on Carter and hothouse flowers in a shed at the back of the Dove and launched ourselves in the Caribbean. Eno came as a guest and John Peel wrote a review in the Observer. Vic Radio was born in a caravan in Christchurch Park and grew to a 4-year feature of Castle Hill Community Centre, where I'd met Black Ivory in the rehearsal room a decade earlier. Michelle followed in Jackie's Tiger Rad's footsteps to launch the word from her flat in Fonery Road, and we all knew the medium was the message. By the time Eastern Arts closed my bookshop at the Arts Centre, Suffolk had lost a third of its trees in the hurricane, and I had been invited to watch the birth of my third child by caesarean section. And the campaign had an office in the High Street with a vision for the future. But we had reckoned without rate capping, and the developers, who took Tower Ramparts Annex at Bolton Lane, temporary home of librarians, school refusers and performing arts, on a journey to gentility and luxury accommodation, driving us back to our garages and computers to reinvent the world in virtual reality. Well, it seems now we are indeed. That was not written 30 years ago, but it was about stuff that happened from up to about 30 years ago. And it's kind of ironic that the last line is reinventing the world in virtual reality, because that is exactly what we're doing right now. But one day, we're going to be able to get out. We're going to actually meet our friends, and all these people that have been talking to each other across the globe will come together, and we will celebrate. If you like the poems, there's the tipped hat underneath. Drop a coin in it, drop a note in it. I'll be truly grateful. Meanwhile, this is John Rowe at the World Poetry Cafe, wishing you a good day.